Okay, today is July 15th, 2005. I'm Jessica Clark, Patricia Mack, Germans from Russia History Fellow, and the coordinator for the Germans from Russia Oral History Project. It is a pleasure to visit with Christina Long in Berlin, North Dakota. To start with, can you state your full name, including your maiden name?
Christina Aberle Long.
And when were you born?
December 29th, in 1930.
And where were you born?
I was born in Emmons County at our home, farm home.
With your birth, did your parents ever share a story with you about your birth, about whether or not like a midwife was there or a doctor?
My grandmother was the midwife.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did she deliver all of your mother's kids?
No. The two of us that were born over there.
Okay.
And after we moved to Berlin, then they had a doctor come out to the house.
When you think back to your childhood, what would you say is one of your first memories, one of your earliest memories?
I think my earliest memories is when I was about 3, I was going to walk over to my grandma's. They lived about 1.5 miles from us, and I remember going down the road, and when my mother came and picked me up, that I couldn't be out on the road going to grandma's. But the first story that I remember, and that was when I was, she just brought me home, took me home. And when my first story that I remember when we were living over there was Christmas. We went to my grandmother's house for Christmas. My uncle and aunt were there with their kids, and Santa Claus was not an important part of Christmas. It was the Belsenigel.
Oh, yeah.
That was the Santa Claus, and he was always the bad guy, and he would take the kids that had been mean, especially boys. He would take them and drag them off, but the nice person was the Christ child. Yet, you say Christ child, it was a Griechkine, but it was a bigger person, dressed in white and had ribbons all over so you couldn't really recognize her. And they had a donkey that came with them. And we were all sitting in this row of chairs, and we all got a little, I remember mine was a little lard pail. It had Swift lard on it, and there was candy and nuts and a marshmallow cookie with chocolate on it. I had never seen one like that before. And so that was exciting to me. Here comes this donkey, comes up into my pail and wants that cookie. And I was so scared, I gave it to him. So I never even got to taste that cookie that I thought looked so good. And the Christ child was really good and had toys for us. And I heard that Belsenigel out in the other room, and you could hear the chains rattling, and there were guys screaming, and I was so scared because I thought the Belsenigel was taking these boys, was carting them off. And I suppose they made their own noise out there, but it was not Santa Claus, it was the Christ child that was the important one.
Do you know about how old you were?
I was 4.
You were 4?
I was 4.
That could be scary for a 4.
Yeah, it was.
When you think back, speaking of Christmas, how was Christmas traditionally celebrated when you were growing up?
We always got one gift for Christmas, and we always got a bag that had candy and nuts in it. We each got our own bag, and we never had a Christmas tree until later years. It seemed like the holidays were not important. Thanksgiving was certainly not ever celebrated in our families. And when we would go back to school, the teacher would say, well, what did you have for Thanksgiving dinner? I made up things that we had because it was no different than any other day, but yeah, and Christmas, church was always the important thing. And this was always very important to the Germans from Russia. Church was where they gathered, it's where they socialized, and so that was always the big thing, midnight mass. And then Santa Claus always came in the morning. Yeah. No, in the evening. Yeah, John's family was in the morning. Ours was always Christmas Eve. Santa Claus came.
So
Yeah.
with that one gift that you got as a child, would it be something practical, or was it something that a kid would enjoy?
Is something that a kid would enjoy. I remember that time at Christmas over at Grandma's, I got a little blue bed, and Mom had crocheted around some material to make a little sheet on it. And I had that until we had lived over here. We were married. I still kept that little blue crib. And so we did get things like a toy.
Okay.
And as we got older, I remember getting a Schaefer pen and pencil set, which I was very excited about because I thought that was a big thing. And then when I started school, my mother was afraid that I would maybe tell the other littler kids that there is no Santa Claus because she thought I'd hear that in school. So she told me that there was no Santa Claus, that it was Mom and Dad. And she said, so don't say anything to the other kids. And she said, we don't have much money, we're poor, so you won't be getting a gift, now that you know anyway. I wanted to cry, and then at Christmas, I got my bag, of candy and nuts, and I opened it up, and here was a little box, and I opened it up, and it was a chain with a little cross on it. Then I wanted to cry again, because she wanted me to still have the fun or surprise of something for Christmas, and so being she had told me about Santa Claus, she tried to,
Make it a different
Right.
You mentioned that you didn't do anything like a special Thanksgiving dinner. Would Christmas dinner be a different type of foods? Or?
No, we never had different foods for different holidays. No.
What about like Easter or other holidays throughout the year? Would you celebrate those at all, or?
We always dyed eggs.
Okay.
It was something we had. So yeah, we always had dyed eggs. Yeah.
How about 4th of July? Would you do something for 4th of July?
No. In later years, we always had watermelon. We got watermelon for the 4th of July, but not that we went to celebrate anything. Some people would go down to the park, Memorial Park, and have picnics. My dad never liked that. He said, I have all the picnic I want out in the field, because he'd get his dinners out in the field.
Okay.
And so we never did things like that.
Something that I've seen that's been common in some different interviews was like having people over to make sausage or having people over for butchering. Would your family do that?
Yes, we sure did. We would butcher the pigs, as many as we needed in the fall of the year when it was cold enough, and neighbors or relatives would come and they would help, with the butchering. And I remember, how they heated the water and they put it in this barrel, and that's how they scalded the pig. And then it was scraped, the hair was scraped off the pig. And then we took the intestines, and that was always my job. They would take the intestines and then they would cut them in the bottom and let all the stuff run out, and I would have to keep pouring warm water as they would, keep. And then Mom had a breadboard on 2 5-gallon pails, and she would turn them inside out and then would scrape them. Scrape them with a table knife, and then put them in salt water, so that they would be clean. So they cleaned their own casings, and the stomach, they took the stomach and they emptied that, and they cooked meat like the livers. They called it the white kidneys and the dark kidney, but really it was the lungs. And we always liked that better because it was more chewy. I mean, they didn't waste a thing. And so that was cooked, and the meat from the head, that was all cooked, and then they put it into the sausage, and that was head cheese. So that was what they used, to make that head cheese. And then Mom would fry the sausage put it into jars and can it, and they would take the meat and put it into barrels with salt water, a lot of salt, to preserve it. So we called it salt meat, and they'd usually be out in the granary where it was cold, and then we'd have to go out there and get some of that meat in, and we'd boil it. And Dad would cure the hams himself, and sometimes he would smoke the ham or smoke some of the sausage, and he'd hang it over a wire. He had a little fire under this barrel, and but Mom did a lot of the canning of the meat because there was no other way to keep it. It was in the salt water and what she had canned.
So did she also do a lot of canning of vegetables and stuff?
Oh my, yes. We always had a big garden. We had a big garden, and she canned lots of vegetables. I have to say that what we ate was what we raised. Yeah.
What type of animals? You mentioned that you had pigs and
Chickens,
okay.
cows, milk cows,
Okay.
some beef cattle. Yeah.
So would you say your dad was a little bit of everything for a farmer? He raised meat and had crops?
Right. Yes, he did. And he was a very, should I say fussy? Very neat. I mean, the hammer had its place, the saw had its place, everything had to be in its place. But I loved working with my dad. I was the oldest one in the family, so I worked outside a lot. And when it was combining time, we had a combine. When Dad bought a combine, we had a binder and we had a header. And then when we got a combine, it was one that had to be pulled with a tractor. So Dad would be on the combine, putting the auger up and down, and I was driving with the tractor. And he would whistle, and I'd turn around to look, and he'd point that the swath is heavy. I had to slow down, And sometimes he would whistle, and I'd look back, and he was just smiling. And it was kind of like everything's happy with the world. I loved working with him, And so when we would grease the combine, I had a little grease gun because I had my circs that I had to grease, and Dad had the big gun, for the bigger circs that needed more grease. And then a number of years ago, we were at an auction sale, and here was a pail of junk, and there was that little grease gun, just like the one I always used. You just kind of pumped it with your palm of your hand. And I said to John, I want that grease gun. I really want that grease gun. And so he bid on it, and he bid on it, and somebody else kept bidding and bidding and bidding, and finally I said, let it go. And then I went over to the man and I said, how much would you want for that grease gun? And he said, oh, I don't want that grease gun. You can have that. I wanted the bell that goes on the horse's harness. And so I got the grease gun and I cleaned it all up. I still have it out in the drawer. And one time Mom and Dad were here and I showed Dad that grease gun and I said, Dad, look what I found at the auction sale. I've got this grease gun. And they always thought that I had to work so hard, but they were the happiest years of my life, when I worked with Dad. And my mother and Aberle